Hi everyone, welcome back to Currency, this podcast that I've done for a few months. It remains current, I guess, as long as I'm doing it. There's a such thing as current events that I don't want to have to cover current events because that's a lot of pressure because current events is always happening and they're always current and I'm not the authority on current events. I am the authority on currency, and that's my interpretation or your interpretation of it depends on how much an authority or in what realm, in what respect I am an authority on currency. That's up to you, and that's up to me, and that's just the way that it's going to be, and that's the way that it's going to have to go down, and I'm not proud of mistakes that I've made, and I'm disgusted with myself. And I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just going into a line of speaking that was in line with the way that I was talking, and like based on the tone that I was speaking with, was like maybe those words would come out of my mouth, and so I went into it. I didn't mean any of it. I'm not disgusted with myself. Not very much. Maybe not, probably not as much as I should be, but I am a narcissist, so that's that's what you're dealing with. And so I am a narcissist, and the point of narcissism is kind of like capitalism, and to be the best narcissist in some respects, at least for the people that are narcissists, not that they would want to admit it, but they probably would because, like, admitting that you're a narcissist would probably allow you to get into higher levels of narcissism or, like, be more successful and win more. So, narcissism is kind of about winning at an individual level and maintaining that as an individual I should win or like I want to win. Like me wanting to win is maybe it contributes to being a narcissist, but I guess I'd describe that being a narcissist is like um in my opinion, and I'm not trying to be like facetious, but and by the way, I wanted to mention that it was brought to my attention that in the Bill Gates episode of Identity, when I was doing that I said something incorrect. I said something that I'm not proud of and I'm disgusted with myself, but not really. I'm not disgusted with myself. I said that Bill Gates owns NPR and I'm wrong. He does not own NPR. And it was brought to my attention that someone was like, he doesn't own NPR. And to me, they told me that. And it's true. He doesn't. He just funds it considerably. He doesn't own it, but I said he owned it, and so I am wrong. And this brings me to my next point, which is that if you know me, bring up any individual statement I said and be like, oh, you're wrong about that. And then I will bring it up here on this program and say I was wrong so that I can correct it because I I don't it's hard for me to acknowledge that people listen and like they're literal enough that they would actually take those words. I'm not saying that I was right. I'm saying that I'm wrong. So I don't want to justify it. But like it's whatever. I didn't mean to try to explain why I would be wrong because that doesn't help my cause. What helps your cause is to be like I was wrong because but anyway, and I'm always trying to help my cause because I'm a narcissist. So I'm saying that you can bring it to my attention. I'll be like, it was wrong. If it was wrong, I would argue you over it if it wasn't, and comment in my YouTube if you don't want to bring it to my attention or you don't know me. Comment to my YouTube, no, you're wrong about this statement, and then I'll argue with you in the comments. And if you're right, I'll bring it up on here. And if you prove that I'm wrong, that's a great reward for you, and that's good for you. You get the pride of saying that I was wrong about something that I end up bringing up like I was wrong. Then congratulations to you. That's the greatest victory of all. Because I'm never wrong except for when I say that Bill Gates is the thing, except for when I say that Bill Gates is the guy for the whatever, except for Bill Gates owning NPR, he doesn't own it. And it's just that um, it just comes down to a matter of words, a simple matter of words. But what I was going to say was, here's what being a narcissist, what I mean by if I'm a narcissist. Like, I might not be as narcissistic as anyone. I don't think that it makes you mean to be narcissistic. I'd say that I'm pretty nice, and I am nice to people too often. I think I'm too nice to people, but that doesn't detract from that I'm a narcissist. I'm not trying to say that it's like a positive thing, but it's just that everybody is a narcissist to some level. But politically speaking, I think that the bent is towards hating narcissists if you're on the left. Like, modern day liberalism exists in the form of hating narcissism and hating individualism. And it's the same thing as hating capitalism. But what I was going to say is that my experience is I feel like I go in a direction, like the direction always defines me. Like, being a narcissist, I think, is about always wanting people to like you, but it's just that there are people that are like that, and there's large segments of the left that would probably like to act like narcissism doesn't exist for real in reality, or that we can ridicule that out of existence. But I think that for me and for a lot of other people, you wouldn't necessarily have to call it narcissism. I'd say that for me, it's like I go in a direction that I would not be able to prevent. And it is always like that. I'm always going in the direction. It feels like a direction that I can't escape from, that I always would want people to like me. And I think that this is a character trait that exists in people. It's not a result of circumstances. I think that it's just a natural inclination, like it's biological. That's what I'm saying. I think that it's a biological thing that you can't escape from. And so you would be wrong to be like, the future is we've rid ourselves of narcissism. It's like, it's kind of like hating men or something. But I'd say that it's like a direction that I can't escape from. And then it's uncomfortable for me when I run into people that have already determined that they hate this kind of behavior. And it's not a bad thing to hate narcissism. I'm just saying those people exist, that they just hate narcissism. I feel like I run into people that already know what I would be about, or like this thing I'm describing, like I'm always going in that direction. I feel like there's people that already see that about me just upon meeting me, because some people are perceptive in that area and they just hate that kind of person the same way that I hate a certain kind of person. And so then it's uncomfortable when I run into somebody like that who automatically hates me just because of biologically, I go in a direction of like, maybe I want something from people, and then people can see that right away. Sometimes they hate that in other people, because there's lots of people that hate individuals or hate individualism. And it's kind of like hating capitalism. And like, it's like hating capitalism because capitalism is about capitals and competing capitals, and it's totally about that. And it's like I just really like to talk about visibility at this state of my life. I like the idea of that, the visible versus the invisible. And I don't really understand why we don't have terms for different levels of popularity. I think that that's something I'm trying to communicate often, is that there's popularity, but then there's sustained popularity, and we don't really have words for like the way that Pink Floyd is popular over decades versus popular, like being vapid, existing for a minute and then popping like a bubble, pop music kind of thing. Like, we call all of that popularity, and it's just a result of limits in the English language. And it's a result of limits in the English language, and there's people that get all legal about whatever it is. I think that there's a lot of legalism that comes from the church, and that the church is becoming more liberal, and like in a way that is not beneficial to them, because like I think you would want to look at like the way that the church is becoming more liberal. I think that they get theatrical sometimes in replicating the kind of feminism that they see in the world. And if you're watching the video broadcast, this is a drumstick that I got for Christmas. It has white stripes on it. My mom and my sister gave it to me, or maybe my mom gave it to me because they know that I like different kinds of drumsticks. So that was nice of them. But I wouldn't actually ever play drums with this. And I've only ever played drums on a stage like once or twice. And I wouldn't play drums on a stage with this drumstick because it would make it looks festive and ridiculous. But I would apparently, I mean, I would put it on the internet that I own this at least, so I'm not a monster. Um, and but it doesn't make you a monster to hate somebody's Christmas present. And Christmas presents are just kind of arbitrary, and a lot of times they're just yeah, I did the thing. It's just to go along with the observance. If you're not being fun about the present that you're giving, there's nothing wrong with presents. It's just kind of tedious to buy them. And 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 then so the thing is that I wanted to bring up, I'm stalling for time because I think I have to go an hour, like, so I'm not being dense with the material. I'm not being dense enough. So I'm like filling it, oh, this is going to be an hour. So I start thinking that I don't have enough things to say, but it's like, that's just a matter of me not believing, like plotting and planning for the hour format, like organizing it as I'm speaking. And I don't think it's helpful because then I don't come out with what I meant to say. What I meant to say about the example I started like 3 minutes ago is that Christians are maybe too liberal, but maybe you should look at what happens with Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman when they come out with the that bullshit that they made about Santa being white, and it's like promotional of feminism, but like modern day feminism, and the kind of feminism that is held, like the interpretation of it that's held by people born in the 90s maybe, or and above. And like this is a caricature of modern day feminism, the same thing that happens when people are like, women need to be the Ghostbusters, and then that bombs. And this isn't like that. This isn't as major a scale because this is just like some dumb Christmas movie. And the point of it is, like, who knows what the point is besides that Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman are these kind of people that we continually hate. But they made this Christmas movie that's like a feminist agenda, and kind of like Santa is white, and that is like America liking Santa is racist. And it's always like Santa, they're saying, is representative of evils in society, that like he just does work one day a year or whatever. I don't really know because I didn't see it, because I feel like everybody that's criticizing it maybe didn't even see it, but everybody's like, this fucking sucks, like in publicly. And it's because it's a referendum on that kind of agenda and those messages, and that we don't like them. And I think that people are growing to see that as sexism and as racism a little bit more, like trying to say that these race issues, I feel like this is a derivative set of messages, and it's just like really obvious to modern feminism and modern like racist, like it's too obvious, and people don't really like that anymore. But I feel like the church carries on sometimes holding these ideas of feminism as if they're true or as if they are the future. And I think that is, everybody hating this Sarah Silverman, Seth Rogen movie is a referendum on that kind of feminism, and people saying that it actually isn't the future. It's not the future that we want, because like there's liberalism that exists in the church. And my question is, like, I feel like there's liberalism that exists in the church that's kind of feminist, that's against men and individuals and against narcissists. And I wonder what the church is going to do with pastors of churches when pastors of churches are narcissists, and especially when projecting is a really highly used term in today's language to describe, like, people project their own problems into the world. When they're describing somebody else, they're actually just talking about themselves. And like when pastors use the term God, I think that that's something that Christians are maybe about to evaluate. That pastors use the term God, and like, really, what amount are they projecting or just talking about themselves? Just like when pastors tell you God is telling you to do something, a lot of times, and like, to what percentage are they just using God to say that they themselves are telling you to do something? But it's like God is a medium that people use, that lots of people use all over the place. Uh, People use mediums to say, whatever is the thing, rather than that they can come right out and say it. Like, I would say that in the world today, in America, you can't, if you're angry at something, you're mad at somebody, you can't go to them and say, I'm mad at you, because you're not allowed, you're not going to say I'm mad at you and then for this, like, unless you really know them, like, and especially in a public setting. In a public setting, there's lots of rules, and you wouldn't, especially in like a social gathering. But this is like, through social gatherings is often the only physical interaction that people have, but gatherings often have a lot of rules, to the point that you wouldn't be, if you were mad at somebody there, you wouldn't be like, I'm mad at you for this, as explanation for why you did something. Or like, communication is restricted enough that people aren't saying like, I'm mad at you, but instead they have to communicate it through some other means. And I think that it's kind of like a problem, but not really. It's just that people use other things to be the excuse for why they're angry, rather than that they can just come right out and say, I'm angry about this, because you're not allowed to be angry about a lot of things. Like, what you might be naturally angry about, you can't say. And then people, like, and so, for example, like when Dave Chappelle makes the newest special that he made, and he's talking about transgenders, in some respects, it's like Dave Chappelle is like a powerful enough wizard that he could invoke transgenderism and incite the mob. And by that I mean, there's like certain phrases and words that you can't use, and they act as like magic spells, that if you say them, then the result is you incite a mob, or it's like you bring a mob against you. It's like saying a word, you can't say the word, but then when you do, a mob comes up. It's like casting a spell or something, or like bringing a curse on yourself. And not everybody has the authority to use the curse, but like Dave Chappelle is powerful enough that he uses it, and then it becomes a big deal. Or like, he can actually incite a mob from doing it. But it's just that transgenderism is this really popular medium as it stands today, and it's like it's like popular mediums that people use to communicate their anger or communicate whatever it is. It's always like, it's mediums, but it's especially popular mediums, and whatever is popular for the time period. And like the same way that fashion is a medium based on the time period, and people communicate different things with the fashion. I'm saying that different time periods have different mediums in the same respect as fashion or popular words. Like, the time period is characterized, and you section off the time period based on what mediums were popular. And so it's like, and those go in and out of popularity. So like, in 10 years, transgenderism won't be the most popular medium. But the point that I'm making is that people use transgenderism not so much because they care about transgenders, but because this is the medium by which you get to exhaust all of your anger as it stands today. And so like maybe Dave Chappelle brings some of that on himself because he knows he's not allowed to talk about transgenders, but like, then people use that he said that to get mad at him for all kinds of reasons, like because it's kind of like, I'd say that leftists overemphasize that transgenders themselves, actual transgenders, would be involved in politics. Like, the left has this sensationalized version of LGBTQ communities and those groups of people, a sensationalized version of it that kind of paints them as being heavily involved in politics. And it's the same with transgenders, at the point that transgender becomes the most popular medium. Like, leftists would have you believe that transgenders are always on the front lines of like protesting and picketing and whatever. Like, it's like the people protesting are all transgenders or something like that, and that they're always angry and they're like on the front lines of progressivism, like they're all leftists and they're all politically minded. And I think that that's really overblown, because the majority of transgenders probably, like, they probably consume political content on transgenderism and watch videos about it, and what they're probably involved, but they probably, just like the rest of America, and there's so many Americans that don't vote or anything, probably most transgenders don't care about politics, and it's kind of like, it's just a slap in the face of them to use them politically, and leftists use transgenders for their political gain. Basically, leftists use transgenderism as the medium at the point that that becomes the popular medium, and they're like, because I think that most gay people are not like, they're not concerned with going out and protesting, but it's like leftism would have you believe that there's like always this uprising of that group of people specifically because they're all so politically minded. And I think that that isn't true, that all gays are politically minded and on the left or whatever. Like, they might be, they're probably majority on the left, but they're not like, they don't care enough. I think that that's just like a stereotype that leftism brings into the picture, is like you associating those groups of people with politics. And I think that that is to the detriment of those groups of people, because to sell to the nation that you're supposed to see them through a political lens doesn't help them out, because then you're going to get everybody hating them for if they don't agree with their politics. Like, if you're on the right, and then you're like, you'll get everybody on the right to hate transgenders. But it's kind of like, what I'm saying is that everybody protesting for Dave Chappelle saying that, I doubt that a lot of those people are transgenders. Like, there's probably some in the crowd, but not all of them. And then there's like people who worked at Netflix that aren't transgenders that are protesting. A lot of those people are protesting on behalf of transgenders, even though they aren't, and don't necessarily care about that group of people. Like, there's lots of people that just hate stand-up comedy, and the hatred of stand-up comedy has been persistent in the country for the last 15 years, because people hate the idea that stand-up comics can just start talking on a stage and then get credibility and then build that into whatever. And there's a lot of hatred for Joe Rogan for that very thing, for him being like, he was able to establish this mega podcast as a result of having an audience previously through stand-up comedy. Because he had a stand-up comedy audience, he was able to parlay that into this giant ass podcast, and now all of a sudden he is one of the biggest names in media, and he's not a researcher and not a scientist. He was just a comedian, and like, people perceive him to be really credible, even though Joe Rogan is just a comedian, and before being a comedian was just a nobody. And there's lots of people that hate the idea that you could be a nobody and then just start talking on a stage and build credibility naturally like that. They want to control media. They want to control people who think they can speak originally or be individual. Like, they want to control individualism, and they hate that stand-up comedy is a way for people to do that. They hate the example of Joe Rogan, and so they're pissed about shit like that people who are a slap in the face to research are just getting all this credibility. And so they use transgenderism to be pissed at Dave Chappelle because they hate stand-up comics. There's people that hate him because he's black, and they use that he said transgenderism to get pissed at him. There's people that hate him because he's a man, and they're feminists, and they use transgenderism they want to deplatform all of men. And like, so there'd be a lot of things that Dave Chappelle represents already, and there's like people that are waiting to say their piece, but there's all these people that are angry about shit like that, and you're not like, especially because of the political climate, you're not gonna readily say, I'm pissed about like these things, because then the other side of the aisle will tell you you're stupid or whatever. Like, and there's a lot of pressure to not be fully one side of the aisle too. And it's difficult to communicate anger and say, like, I am angry about this. You're not allowed to do that. Socially speaking, what you can do is use the popular medium of the day, and then this is like an opportunity for you to be angry or whatever. So people go out and protest in the name of whatever in their heart they care about. But for a lot of them, I would say it's not necessarily transgenderism. And what happens is just transgenderism, when it becomes one of the most popular mediums, it's just brought to this public level, which is more abstract rather than like personal and physical. Like it's like the more that it can appeal to lots of people for them to be able to use it as a medium, like the more popular that it is. Like it is an argument, but it's like people use that, they use an argument to say this is my time to argue, or like argue anything, or they just like see it as an argument. Like people use argument to argue whatever they want, as long as there is some big argument that's taking the blame for any argument that you want to bring up, and you can throw it all under that roof and say like, and it's okay and it's acceptable because people at this time accept that you're arguing in the name of transgenderism. But it's like it's just kind of the name or the title that it's all centralized under. And centralization is a thing, or is like centralization is you might call it a problem, but that we're getting rid of. Like decentralization is happening and in a lot of areas, but it's kind of like when they made Facebook was a decentralized version of whatever we had before, or like it allowed for all of these planes of communication that you didn't have before. And so it was like relatively decentralizing to communication to allow for more mediums of it on the website. Through the function of Facebook created various forms of mediation through which you could communicate that didn't exist before. And like decentralization is a decentralizing of media to create various forms of media. Diversification, particulation of media is like the direction of decentralization is this direction. It decentralizes media and breaks it up, disintegrates it into different forms. TikTok is a decentralized YouTube, but YouTube is a decentralized cable TV. But it's like, but what gets decentralized is media, because TikTok has a greater capacity for different forms of media, basically through what you're able to do on there. More people are given a platform to speak than on YouTube, because like it has something to do with I'm talking about how short the videos are on TikTok. That's what makes it decentralized YouTube. And like now you can do 3-minute TikToks, and I don't know if they went to an hour, that makes them the same as YouTube. Like maybe they would want to avoid doing that. Like if they allowed hour-long videos, currently the highest they allow is 3 minutes. But TikToks are generally like under a minute, and this is just diversified media that you can see like 200 TikToks in an hour. This is a greater level of diversification of media than YouTube, where every video that somebody makes is a different medium, because people are mediums, really, is the thing. But TikTok better expresses how people are all mediums communicating whatever it is. But the emergence of TikTok and cryptocurrencies and a greater level of decentralization of media, I would say, decentralizes the individual, or a hyper-individualized state of things. And America has existed in a state of hyper-individualism, I would say, for a while. They exist in a state of hyper-individualism because of their dependence on capitalism. And like capitalism is kind of narcissistic, and it's kind of like it's individualized, but there used to be more pressure on a famous person or more pressure to be famous, but now that expectation isn't there. Like, I think that people are more willing, more satisfied with just being famous for 15 minutes when everybody has been given the platform to where everybody is able to be be medium for whatever they're saying. It disintegrates hyper individualism, where it's like you're not going to spend a bunch of time with one individual or on one individual's content, and that expectation isn't there for the individuals making it. So they aren't expected to like be famous for a longer period of time. And so because of the cultural change in that direction, where like fame isn't where you are trying to be that for longer or forever, um, like because of that cultural change, everybody is like it's the individual creator doesn't isn't expected to like be the sole source of entertainment for other people. Like basically people have the opportunity to collect lots of different forms of currency, lots of different popular people on TikTok. You can collect lots of these. It's more disintegrated. Um, and it's like it has something to do with currency, and the direction that worth is going is that you collect lots of different forms of it. And so this is in the face of one individual getting the most currency or getting the most popularity. It's like popularity still exists now, but we used to in America live in uh, this state of things where we highly emphasize popularity, and popularity is being de-emphasized more and more as it stands now, to the point that it's difficult that anybody would care about being popular. I think that the era of Kanye West's is possibly over. I don't think that by that I mean that I don't think that that there can be that necessarily anymore. Like the greatest artist of a generation, that era might be over because of the death of the hyper individualized state of things that used to exist in America. And I think it's more the case that if you're popular in pop music now, that you are just going to be resigned to one song. Like Lil Nas X makes more songs after the big hit that he's most known for. And it's always been that way, that people are one hit wonders in pop music. It's just that sustained success is not really a standard. So people who make songs and are popular for it, it's more likely that they're just going to flash for a second or just have one album that they're known for. It seems like that's the way it exists with pop music, but yet it doesn't popularity isn't completely dead, like sustained popularity, because there's still individuals that would care about obtaining the most viewership and the most popularity, even when that expectation isn't there for them, where like people would be like, oh, you were popular for like the rest of the public doesn't say that you have to be popular for a long time in order to be popular. The public is like, oh, you made it if you did it even for a second anymore. Like that's the standard for it is kind of decreased. And so, but there are people that will try to be big for a long time no matter what. So it's like you can still be a hyper individual because hyper individualism still exists. Like Playboy Cardi and Megan Thee Stallion have this sustained popularity where they keep, well, like at least Playboy Cardi keeps putting out albums and then continues to be big. Like we're excited about him because he continues to put out good music. He's not satisfied with the success that he's achieved. So he's kind of like a Kanye West in that respect, where like I'm saying a Kanye West is somebody who um, continues to make albums that are really good, and they're able to do that because even if they achieve the highest level, they were just somebody who is naturally so inclined to be popular, so natural, like inherently popular, that they're not living to like the standard. So it's still possible to be very popular as an individual. It's just that that standard has decreased a lot. But I'm talking about capitalism and how like capitalism is for real, and it's like the way that different countries have capitals is like how countries as nations get to dictate currency as it stands now, like the perception of currency up until this point, before before cryptocurrency gets really big, and so then currency is really diversified and is not constrained to nations. Like the way that currency has existed up to this point is at the national level, and so the perception is at this national level, um, which is more abstract, the same way that a popular medium is abstract and goes beyond the level of like individuals that are transgenders. When transgenderism becomes the most popular medium, that it's like this political issue, and then it then gets to this level where it applies to everybody in the country because it's like a medium that anybody can use. When it goes public like that, it becomes more abstract. And that's just like its perception and the scope of it has expanded to the national level if it becomes like one of the most popular mediums in a nation, for a time period. But I'd say that this same level of perception that I'm describing is the way that currency exists now, is at this national level. And so that's not relatively the best description of currency, because we live, I mean, this is like a projection of our consciousness to some degree. And I'd say to some degree saying that there are nations is like projecting the need for, I mean, projecting the need for governance at this major level that isn't true to the way that we actually perceive life, which is at an individual level. Like individual humans only perceive life through their finite frames of reference and only talk to, but like social media and technology makes it so that you're like talking to all these people that you're not even around. And it's difficult to say what is natural and what isn't, because I feel like generally you're supposed to say that things that aren't natural are like more I would say more layers of money, which is the same as more layers of consciousness or awareness, or more layers of representation of what previously existed. Like more layers of representation is more layers of consciousness, and layers of consciousness separates you from reality. And like these layers are kind of like identifiers that are like they're things, they're like masks that you put over yourself, like layers of awareness. And it's brought about through language, because you can't escape from language. That language is how you communicate yourself, and like the English language is limited to certain touchstones, which are the words that we've carved out as words. And because of this limited nature of things, people perceive like, I guess I forget. I went off on a train there, and I forget exactly the point I was making. But what I'm saying is perception exists at the national level for currency, and people get like currency perception exists at the national level for currency because this is how we understand currency. Everybody in America is like, somebody in San Jose, California is trading all of their assets and whatever in terms of the US dollar, and then somebody in Hollywood, Florida, or Boca Raton, Florida, is also trading all their assets in the US dollar. But these are two very far different across locations, but because they're all under the same perception, because they're all under the same nation, and we're like, this is what's true about life, is that life is communicated through nations. Like nation is this perception that we assume, as long as there are nations. And like it's kind of the same as assuming that currency should be applied across a nation, because before this point no technology has arisen that could disintegrate that perception. And it's the same with like currency. Oh, my mind is just failing me right now. My mind is deciding to fail me. It's the same with capital, that it's the same with capitals and capitalism. Like every single nation, I'm saying that this national level of currency interpretation is the same as the interpretation of capital, where it's like we say that there is capitals of countries, and so to some extent capital itself and capitalism is interpreted at this national level, where it could actually be interpreted at the individual level. But as time goes on, we will come to realize that capital exists at an individual or peer-to-peer level. The same way it the same way that currency is being decentralized, capital is being decentralized. In the same respect that we use capital as a word for money and for assets, and that is what is being decentralized, is like the interpretation of currency from the national level to it's being decentralized to the peer-to-peer level, where we understand money. Like with the emergence of cryptocurrency, we more understand money to exist peer-to-peer, not owned by a centralized controlling entity. But this is directly in opposition to the idea of capital is decentralization. You see that that's true because it decentralizes currency, decentralizes nations themselves, and like it kind of decentralizes a perception that exists at this very public level. Maybe it disintegrates publicness at all, and it's true that it does. Public is more people-ish. This is like for the people is something that's public, and like public is for everybody. And it's the same with popularity. Is if you are popular, you are people-ish, according to the terminology. Popular is a word for people-ish, and decentralization in the current state of things, popularity is being decentralized, publicness is kind of being decentralized, and so it's like difficult more and more to read a lot of importance into any one individual, especially when the individual you're able to see so many individuals during the course of a day than you used to through technology, through TikTok, like this diversification of media, and like I'd say maybe what goes along with that is more difficult for mediums to really for lots of people to be interested in, to call one medium the popular one. It's more difficult to have that. But I'm saying that capital is being disintegrated too, and capitalism takes a big hit over the last few years especially, and I think that America is coming to terms with its dependence on capitalism, and the coronavirus causes capitalism to take a big hit. Like I think that we perceive capitalism to be a lot less our savior than we did 3 years ago in America, and it goes along with a destruction of narcissism, like kind of pointing out that there's flaws in narcissism, pointing out that there's flaws in a hyper-individualized environment. And like America has been this individualized environment for so long because they are so capitalistic. But capitalism is individualism because it's what you're saying is the race for competing individuals across individuals, like where there's rankings and things like that, is competing across individuals. And I'm saying like competition will still exist and all that. Like capitalism will still exist into the future. It's just that national level of capitalism where the perception is abstracted out to be at the level of nations. Like I'm saying that capital in a lot of instances is being disintegrated. And so you see when they're comparing GDP, that's like a giant race, that's a competition across countries to determine who is the best country. And that's a result of like who has the most capital is who has the most money. And capital is like a word for assets. And it's like like capital is a word for assets, and we have this interpretation of capital that's at a national level, but that's being disintegrated. And it's like it's kind of like every civilization to this point has capitals. Every major civilization throughout human history has a capital, and capitalists go along with the national perception of capitalism, where it's like at the level of the country you have a capital, and then we perceive a lot of importance into Washington and the game that plays out there according to Washington, like the political game of who is the president and who are the best representatives. And that's just like the competition that exists is naturally capitalistic, but um, there's like every country through every civilization has a capital, and like the Roman Empire, the capital is Rome. The Roman Empire existed as a capital in terms of empires. The Roman Empire was like the capital of the entire world, but Rome was the capital of the Roman Empire. But pretty much throughout human history, through the centuries, we've been dependent on capitalism, not just in terms of competing economies, but it's like this is happening at every level. Like different state economies compete to have the most capital within America, and then different countries compete to have the best capital, and that's why we keep track of GDP, and we're like, America is the richest, they have the most GDP, and it goes along with that. Every major civilization ever has had a capital. I don't really know why that is. It's probably because we haven't articulated a greater level of decentralization, because decentralization essentially decentralizes headquarters of companies, is what you're talking about, is what's so important about it with the emergence of cryptocurrencies, is that in the future you'll have decentralized apps instead of centralized ones. And so it's quite possible that all of those decentralized apps will have all of the same functions that we have now. It's just that they'll be decentralized as opposed to centralized. And like Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube are all centralized entities. And like, and so you'd have to think about what is important about that message that decentralized apps would come along and provide all the same functions. What people like about the decentralized ones is that they're not owned by anybody. They're peer to peer. And so my question would be, like, it's weird to say that that is so transcendently a better function than the centralized apps that we have now, because cryptocurrencies that exist now are ultimately centralized entities, because when you get a cryptocurrency like the Sandbox, or any of them, I'll use the Sandbox as an example. The Sandbox is centralized under that title so that all of the assets and money that everybody owns in terms of the Sandbox and their money is called sand. If you own a lot of the Sandbox's cryptocurrency, you own a bunch of sand. And sand currently is running at like $6 or so, a little bit more than that, last I checked. So you own one sand and that's worth $6, but you can accumulate tons of sand. And pretty much sand is like all of the assets. Here's the thing about the Sandbox. Let me explain it to you. There's these cryptocurrencies that are metaverses. And when Zuckerberg made the metaverse for Facebook, he's really just being a dick, because the term metaverse already existed for all of these companies that created a metaverse, like cryptocurrency or some other version of a metaverse. Facebook is like, what we created is the metaverse. It isn't, because there are already all kinds of metaverses. They just decided to use that term to be a dick, I guess. I mean, to say like, oh, well, ours is the one. I guess it's really good branding, but remains to be seen whether or not people get on board with that. It might just make it so that all these companies that are calling themselves metaverses, like we graduate to some different term to describe them, which happens often. We'll often go to a different term when it becomes difficult to use the original one, because some major player has a monopoly on it or something. So then like we have to stop calling it a metaverse. But there's these cryptocurrencies that are metaverses. The two biggest ones, by far the ones that have the most notoriety, are Decentraland and the Sandbox. And they're right next to each other in the rankings, like 39 and 40. But pretty much the Sandbox offers you the ability to buy land, virtual land in their world. And in the Cosmos episode, I was describing how cryptocurrencies collectively, it's like cryptocurrency tokenizes the world. And really, that is an underestimation, because what cryptocurrency all collectively tokenizes is something more like the universe, because every one cryptocurrency, it has the opportunity to be this metaverse where they offer their own world. Like the Sandbox is one cryptocurrency, and it tokenizes the world all on its own by providing this virtual world where you buy and sell assets all with their native token sand, and you buy land on there with sand. But basically, there's all these tiny squares of land in the Sandbox metaverse, in the Sandbox um, virtual world, and there's these tiny squares and you can buy any one of them, and it's just that like this tokenizes buying land and selling land in the real world. Like, to me it sounds fun, the idea of buying and selling property, or like collecting property in the real world, but I would never do that because that's just this huge commitment. This whole thing, it's not something that it's like all the work that you'd have to go through. That's like a whole lifestyle. That's a whole identity you have to commit to. You're buying and selling property in the world. But now digital currencies allow you to be a landlord like this pretty easily just by buying things on your phone, because the land that you buy is probably going to appreciate, and then you can sell it for a higher price later on. And so there's these tiny squares of land on the Sandbox. Every one of them is selling for $14,000 as it stands now. These tiny, very tiny virtual land squares you can buy for like $14,000 and then develop the property. Like, in this virtual world, you have the ability to write your own software in the property that you bought to create a game that users of the application can go into your property and play the game. Probably, maybe you make money if the game is popular, but basically if you wanted to buy land in this world, you have to scout out the world to see what areas are best for traffic, the same way that you would in the real world. You want to buy the best property. It's all about location. And so you would have to scout out the world and then choose your property and then buy it and then develop like whatever you think is going to get you the most success. And so there are these virtual worlds, and there's a bunch of cryptocurrencies that are doing this, and the Sandbox is one of them. I'd say that from the limited that I've read about it, the Sandbox is better than Decentraland. The Sandbox is a little bit newer, but like, there's this tokenized entire world. But like, if you sell capital on there, like the point that I'm making is that capital is capitalistic. What decentralization attacks is capitalism, because it destroys the need for headquarters. Like, and the point that I was just making is that cryptocurrency, like the Sandbox, is actually centralized, if you want to view it that way. Because within this universe, it's all one universe, but all under one name, and that is the respect in which it's centralized. It's because everything that happens in this world is centralized under one title and one company. That company is the Sandbox. Like, cryptocurrencies are still companies, and the currency they offer is still basically a stock, and they have measures of governance in the Sandbox world, where if you own enough of it, then you get to vote. But like, different cryptocurrencies have different voting mechanisms for like the owners of its cryptocurrency, or the people who participate in the world that they created. They get to vote under certain conditions. There's measures of governance in different ways across like all cryptocurrencies. And so there's like centralized government basically in every cryptocurrency. And so the question I'd have to ask is, why is that function so much better when it just creates centralized things, the same way that, like, that's the thing that we're attacking here by creating it. And basically it destroys, it's more important in the way that it destroys corporations, and especially headquarters of corporations, but more specifically like capitals and capitalism. Cryptocurrency destroys capitalism and current events of the world, to like currently with the coronavirus causes capitalism to take a big hit. And I think there's something to be said about looking at how corona is a word for crown, and what we have endured through it is the crown virus. And because what's interesting to see in the wake of the coronavirus, of COVID, if we finally get past it, if we finally overcome this virus, like, we're not out of the woods yet, it's not gone yet, but if we get past it, it'll be interesting to see what is left in its wake, because it's a greater level of destruction that happens when there's like tragedy at this great a level. Like, it's like a war. When a war happens, it's a greater level of change and destruction and death that happens in a shorter period of time. And the coronavirus is this kind of thing. Like, like a catastrophe almost that causes a lot of change in a short period of time. Lots of, besides more death, lots of businesses closing down and paving the way for uh, whatever is the new technology, the new state of things for enterprise. Like the old state of things is more dependent on retail, and like physical businesses is more destroyed in the coronavirus pandemic because of the hit that was taken to the economy and stuff like that. Lots of businesses closed down, lots of death and destruction in a shorter period of time. Change happens faster. It's a rapid, like accelerated state of change when there's a catastrophe going on. And that's what we endure with the pandemic. And so then it's interesting to see what is actually destroyed in its wake. And I think that there's these big areas of authority that take a hit, like media takes a big hit, and becomes more decentralized so that every individual person is more harnessing their ability to be a medium, because every person is a medium. Like the mainstream media is selling you on that media is supposed to be centralized and standardized, and that is ultimately the lie. And they kind of will always get to be successful as long as people are speaking in their terms and actually calling them the mainstream media. As long as we're calling CNN the mainstream media, I feel like that's just playing into their hands, because that's ultimately the lie, is that media exists at this level that's very public, where it's like over the entire country, when in reality narration is up to the individual. Media takes a big hit and starts to become decentralized through the pandemic, and we see that they're liars. They have agendas in the same way that they're lying about that media itself is the standard of it is like national or at this big level, like it's standardized to not open, not up to the interpretation of an individual, when in reality every individual is a medium. Everybody explains something. Everybody is an input output, that, and they're channeling whatever they're saying. Anything that anybody is saying comes from somewhere. It's not, even if you're saying that everything you say is cited in research, people who say that they're on the side of research didn't do any of that research, and they're just saying things based on their interpretation. Like if you're really willing to accept what mediums are, every person is a medium and they're channeling something, and it's difficult to say where that's coming from or what they're channeling, and if it's just like from above or if they're lying or whatever. It's a more risky environment to say that every individual is a medium, because then you don't have this like CNN that's taking the blame for that, to say media is only for major players that are telling you that's how media works. But like media takes a hit because we see that how much they lie about the pandemic, and but like bold-faced lies. They say that it's playing out in all these ways, but it's not in pretty much all those ways. Media takes a hit, medicine takes a hit, because there's all this fear of hospitals and that kind of thing. And I think that capitalism takes a big hit, because what gets disintegrated is like headquarters, because that is ultimately like the Sandbox exists and they do have facilities in certain places, but it's like it's a decentralized facility itself is really decentralized in the new state of things with the emergence of cryptocurrencies. It's just kind of a death of headquarters and a death of capitals is what happens with cryptocurrencies versus like the Facebook kinds of things, because Facebook has like headquarters and their biggest buildings and whatever. It's capitalistic, and they are very capitalistic. Like Facebook has tons of money, and they make all that money because the function they provided is revolutionary enough that they're able to acquire and accumulate lots of capital as a result of what they did. Like they're capitalistic in the sense that they're getting lots of money and moving up the rankings with everything that they do. But like it's the headquarters, and that state of things, the way that corporations exist now, is going to be decentralized. And I'd say that it's to the same extent as that we decentralize capitals of countries themselves, like decentralizing nations and decentralizing their currency is the same as decentralizing capitals, but like finally for the first time in human history, decentralizing the idea of capital, that like countries have to have capitals, and all the biggest civilizations have capitals. It's kind of like a decentralization of civilizations um, themselves. But it's like different, like with the Assyrian Empire, with the Assyrian Empire, especially in like the early centuries of its development, because the Assyrian Empire lasted for a really long time. In the early centuries of its development, they didn't have a capital yet in the Assyrian Empire, and different cities that were prominent in the empire all had their own god, and they constructed temples to their gods. And it could have been anything like a jaguar, or like even stuff like that. Different cities have gods, and then they construct a temple and put the symbol and image of their god on their buildings. And basically the biggest cities in the Assyrian Empire would war with each other, and they would go to battle, and they would kill each other in each other's cities to figure out whose god was the best. And what they determined was the god of Asher, which the Assyrian Empire is named after, that the god of Asher was the best god because their city always won. And so it must be that their god was the best. And so I forget what Asher is the god of, but they're like, that's the best god. And so they made Asher their capital. And it's the same thing as today when we have, like, I'll use America as an example, but just sports and competition that exists that way. It's the same as in college football. Every state, every team has their own mascot, and that mascot is kind of like the god of that city and or of the state. Like Wisconsin has the Badger, or just team mascots are this same thing that exists in a different form, I would say. And then your mascot wars against the mascots of other cities to determine who is the best city. And this is very capitalistic. It's like literally a warring of capitals, but whoever has the best has the most capital, essentially. Like that's the result, or that's what you seek to determine. But it's basically like at this point, what we have is a representative form of what we used to have to actually go to battle and kill people in other cities to determine who was the capital or who had the most power. And at this point, we have tokenized that to just winning, where we're like, the win is representative of going to battle and then like killing people in their city. Like us beating our football team, beating your football team and winning is representative of that, of us going into your city and killing these people. We don't need to do that anymore. I would argue that that is because what ultimately was important about it the entire time was just the win, and we have evolved to figure out that winning is the only thing important. Like the pride that you get with it is the most important thing. And it's kind of like it's a more conceptualized state of things now, where we're like, well, a win is just as good as all of that. Like we've evolved to not kill each other, and we find that to be beneficial. And it's kind of like, as time goes on in a lot of these areas, we become more conscious. Like the more that there's technology, this is like greater development of money and structures of money, like different businesses, different inventions that come along. This is developments in technology. They're all in the name of money, sort of. They're all like a little bit in the name of competition, or like providing a function that doesn't exist in order to get money. Like people are trying to get ahead. You have to provide a specific and new function that works in order to make money for it. New inventions, every different company is a different money as it stands now. And like different cities war with each other to figure out, but it's like Ohio State college football, they win lots of games, and basically the win is just as good as like the power they would have received in a past civilization, because they use those wins as currency, the same way that a capital stands for the capital of a country and is representative of like all the victories that country has. And the Assyrians actually named their entire empire after that, after the god of Asher that they deemed to be the most powerful city. They made it their capital. And pretty much the like whatever victories that the Assyrian Empire itself had, they're like chalked up to the capital and whatever money they make. But the point that I'm making is that Ohio State uses wins as currency, basically, that's something that they hold over people because of the perception then that's built into Ohio State. Like, and any time that they win, that's like money that they collect. That's like that's like collecting money, and like Ohio State trades that money in to continue to maintain their reputation as being like the most relevant or the most popular place to go. They trade in those wins for sustained reputation and sustained popularity in the future, where the best recruits and the best coaches will go to Ohio State because of their reputation, because of all of the wins, because they've collected a lot of money in this area where like win is kind of like a money. And they'll have the best facilities because of how much money they collected. Like anytime you get a win, this is like this tokenized version of things. But I'm using this point to say like God has a lot to do with money, and people saying that anybody who's saying that they have God is that they're able to speak on God as an authority. Like, I think that capitals of countries are saying something like this, and your people are like God is kind of like money, and people in perceiving the capital to have all this power is like perceiving God to have all this power. And I mean, like identifying yourself with one country over another one to say like our country has the most capital or has the potential to get the most of it is like saying that your God is better than another country's God. And like that's part of what America identifies itself to, and America is more Christian, is their identity of being the most powerful country in the world and being the richest, has something there. I feel like they think that that says something about their God, and currently what we're living in is a decentralization of capital and sort of a demoralization of Christianity, and maybe at the crux of that is like a question that Christians would have to have about pastors, since we have developing views about what is narcissistic. Like when pastors say God, like, are they just projecting? And I guess the point I'm making is, well, it doesn't matter what point I'm making. I just kind of spazzed out and started thinking that I had to say something important for an entire hour in a row. Like, it's a lot more, the flow of this is a lot more natural if I'm thinking about how it goes in my head. But then I think that the stakes are high when I start recording myself, but they aren't. So I'm lying to myself. But basically, like, the Jews, what's interesting is just how Jews are, like, their God is, they win, because the Bible talks about it. Like, the Bible brings up all of those empires like the Assyrian and the Babylonian, and when they're talking about the Jews and the journey that the Jews were making during that time period when those empires were big. And like at some point during the Assyrian Empire, the king of Assyria decided that the God of the Jews was the best, and then he made everybody in their empire worship the Jewish God, the Israelite God, the Assyrian Empire. And like Constantine did that with the Roman Empire. He's like, everybody has to worship God because that God is the best. Not that like, I guess Constantine was saying more a Christian God than a Jewish one. But what's interesting is that when empire during history decided that the God of the Jews was the best, they're actually right, because the God of the Jews is the best. You know that that's true because the Jews still exist today, basically worshiping that same God, and they live in the same area. It's kind of like the Jewish Empire has this sustained success that outlasted all of those, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and the Jews still exist today. And the Egyptians, like Egypt still exists, but you would be hard pressed to qualify it as an empire. Like Israel still exists, and they still worship that same God that they were worshiping thousands of years ago. And it's really like their God is the best because it continues to last. And I feel like that God is something like time, because in the same way that money is like time, and like Jews are good with money, but I said that at the very end. I said that like an hour, 9 minutes in, so maybe nobody heard it. But it's not so much that it's not like every Jew would be good with money, but I'm saying that Jews are right, and in order to have the God that is the best and have a God, like they're still worshiping the same God now as they did thousands of years ago. And all of these civilizations have gone and went worshiping their God that wasn't as substantial. It didn't last as long. Basically, the only way that Israel still exists worshiping the same God is if their God is something like time, and if that is what it represents. And I feel like in a lot of ways the God in the Bible is like time, but more on that in the future, I guess. This episode is almost ending. Thanks for listening to that. I'll try to be more carefree and less spastic in the future. Not that I was that too much today, but thank you for your camaraderie and your support. And feel free to tell me I'm wrong in any comment. And talk to you all later.